Leaders' questions. I call on Deputy Michael McGrath.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, thousands of individuals and families throughout Ireland are this week receiving letters from the Revenue with an estimate of their liability to pay the local property tax. Many of these families are struggling as it is on very low incomes. Many simply can't pay their mortgage on a monthly basis, but they are expected to pay up the property tax nonetheless. The Government has decided that families with a gross weekly income of anything above €480 per week are not even allowed to defer the property tax liability, and anyone who genuinely cannot afford to pay is hit with an 8% penalty interest per annum. This tax is deeply unfair and fails, Minister, in any meaningful way to take into account the issue of ability to pay. We learned today that 7 out of the 8 people living in unfinished housing estates who were exempt from the household charge last year are now going to have to pay this property tax. The number exempt living in unfinished developments has spectacularly dropped from 43,000 to 5,000, simply because the Minister for the Environment instructed local authorities to go into every single unfinished development in the country and identify the houses that should pay and the houses that shouldn't pay. What people want above all else, Minister, is fairness and consistency. We now have a situation where one family living in an unfinished housing estate who's lucky enough to have a footpath outside the door and maybe even a public light that works will have to pay the property tax. But another family around the corner in the same estate who might be looking out on a heap of rubble on what was supposed to be a green area will now get an exemption. That is a ridiculous scenario, Minister. The Minister for the Environment is using a report, the National Housing Development Survey report, to justify the dramatic drop in the number of people who are going to be allowed to avail of an exemption. But when you look at that report, Minister, it cites that there are about 1,100 unfinished developments in the country that are in a seriously problematic condition. That is the term used within the report, and in order to qualify as being in a seriously problematic condition, the report cites exactly what has to be wrong within the estate, and the estate will want to be in a pretty bad condition to qualify. But the issue is not all of those 1,100 are now going to be exempt. In fact, the Minister has decided that a little over 400 of those 1,100 estates are going to have any exemption at all, and within each of those 400 estates, it's only going to be certain homes. That is blatantly unfair, Minister. And can you justify the enormous discrepancy between the number of estates that are cited as being in a seriously problematic condition and the number of exemptions that the Minister has now decided to grant?
Minister.
Well, essentially, Ceann Comhairle, it relates to two things. It relates to the improved performance in finishing previously unfinished estates, and secondly, it relates to the application of a standardised nationwide methodology of assessment. The Deputy knows well the background to the property tax. He ought to, given that his party authored it. And the purpose of it is to broaden the tax base so that the government can avoid putting additional taxes on income and people at work. And in terms of fairness and consistency, it wouldn't be fair, I'm sure you agree, Deputy, that some citizens would have to pay property tax and others would be exempt. Now, the Department of the Environment assures me that they have gone through the estates one by one and have taken decisions in respect of the current standard of estates. I mean, I presume that you will accept that, you know, if phase 4 of an estate is not commenced, and very probably will not be commenced in my lifetime, whatever about your lifetime, it's wrong to categorise that as an unfinished estate. So the criteria established are there on the website to see. The essentials that must be complied with are transparent, and as you say, it reduces the number of unfinished developments that will be exempt to 421. The application of the tax across the board has to be efficiently collected, and for that reason the government, having regard to assessment of the efficacy of previous collection systems, has allocated that responsibility to the revenue, and the revenue will enforce the law.
Deputy McGrath.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ciarán Comhairle. Minister, I won't use the limited time that I have to go into the politics of this and to go into the politics of the promises made by Labour and Fine Gael that you would not be proceeding with a tax on the family home, because that's there for all to see. I raised.
Sorry. There's a limited amount of time available. No, please, quieten down. There's a limited amount. Please, the deputy has a
Ciarán Comhairle,
No, hold on. This is the debating chamber. He's entitled to his point of view, whether you agree with it or not. The Minister will have a chance to respond.
Ciarán Comhairle, here again this morning we're seeing another reason why it would be absolutely futile to elect another government backbench TD in Meath East next week, because this is what we get every morning when the opposition are asking legitimate questions. I raised a specific question with you, Minister, and the question concerns the decision of the Minister for the Environment to essentially disregard the report that he is using to justify as the basis for the reduction in the number of exemptions. The report cites that there are 1,100 unfinished developments in the country that are in a seriously problematic condition, and it cites issues of lighting, water supply, wastewater, road not being to at least base course level, no footpath, open space. It isn't easy to get into the category of being described as seriously problematic. This is based on the returns by the local authorities. They are saying that there are 1,100 estates that are in a seriously problematic condition, and yet the Minister has cut that down to 400, and even within each of those one of 400, only certain householders are being exempt. So you can't say it's based on the report when clearly it is not. There is a grave inconsistency and unfairness running through the entire way this property tax is being introduced, and we have yet another example of it here this morning with the way that people who are unfortunately living in unfinished developments are being treated.
Thank you. Minister.
Ciarán Comhairle, I don't see how Deputy McGrath thinks that he can leave politics out of it. The reason that we have the unfinished estates is because of the chronic mismanagement that went on under the Fianna Fáil-led government.
Ministers didn't do anything wrong.
That's the reason.
Sorry, would you hold on a second? Hold on. The Minister is entitled to respond to Deputy McGrath. Would you please afford him the opportunity to do so?
That's the reason that we have the legacy of unfinished estates. And, you know, it's very difficult to listen to Deputy McGrath bleeding for the citizens out there when his government authored the property tax and made it a condition that now must be implemented to comply with Troika funding. It was a Fianna Fáil proposition. They were in favour of property tax then, and now, because they're in the middle of a by-election, they pretend to be opposed to it. The report from which he quotes is out of date. The report was completed last summer. The situation worked out since between the Department of the Environment and the local authorities have gone through the list of estates one by one and have decided certain criteria, like, for example, where installation and commissioning of public lighting, provision of potable water supply, provision of wastewater collection, treatment and disposal systems, access roads to at least base course level, including where required, provision for parking, provision of access to the dwelling by constructed footpath, provision of open space capable of serving as amenity needs or permitted developments. So they've gone through the criteria and have decided that there are 421 developments that do not comply with those standards. And in that case, those 421 developments will be exempted. But otherwise, the local property tax, which Fianna Fáil brought in, will be implemented because it's a requirement of the funding arrangement with the Troika.
Thank you.
Minister,
when the household charge was levied, the €100 flat charge on people's homes, over 1,300 estates, which were not completed ghost estates, were exempted from that charge. Now, what you're asking the Dáil to accept is, quite aside from setting aside the report which identifies 1,100 incomplete estates, you're asking us to accept that in less than a year, the number of unfinished estates has more than halved. You're also asking us to accept that even within those estates which are still incomplete, that there are some households that enjoy proper services and facilities and others that don't. Now, it's a bit rich for you to make claims of consistency and fairness when your argument is as patchy and as ridden with contradictions as that. So, can I ask you, Minister, to address yourself to the people, to the thousands of people and families who live in these estates, who have had the stress and inconvenience of living in what in many cases amount to little more than building sites. Can you explain to them, please, Minister, how it is fair for your government to make a demand on them for a payment on their family home? You might also consider in your response, Minister, whether it is reasonable that a single person, for instance, earning a gross income of €16,000, whether it is fair to make a demand for payment on their family home, whether it is fair, for instance, that a couple with a gross income of €30,000, whether they equally should be asked to pay this charge on their family home.
Thank you.
And bear in mind when you respond, Minister, that these categories of people aren't mutually exclusive. There are many, many families and individuals living in ghost estates, living on building sites, who earn very small, very modest incomes. So what about your argument for fairness?
Thank you. Minister.
Well, Ceann Comhairle, Sinn Féin are clearly disappointed that there has been progress made in terms of the unfinished estates. But progress there has. At the time when the local household charge was introduced, it was a holding arrangement, announced to be such at the time, and a broad brush approach was taken to the exclusion of unfinished estates. Since then, on the criteria to which I have referred, and in arrangement with the local authorities, these estates have been gone through one by one, and I'm sorry that Sinn Féin are disappointed that those improvements have been recorded, but they have been recorded, and the exclusion now of 421 developments is considered fair in terms of one neighbour being required to pay property tax and another being exempt. And as Deputy McGrath said, fairness and consistency has to be applied, and I would hope that Deputy MacDonald will also welcome the exclusion of estates built by developers who used pyrite and who have built homes that have imposed extraordinary hardship and misery on householders. So, in terms of criteria that warrant exemption, they have been gone through with the fine comb, and I regard what the Department of the Environment has now published as being fair.
Deputy MacDonald.
The disappointed people, Minister, will be not just those living in ghost estates, and you choose to discriminate as between households, even in those developments that you argue ought to be exempted, but in fact the disappointment will be much broader than that. You see, you have applied a very broad brush in levying this tax, and it's the view of you and your government that even people on social welfare, on small incomes, will be forced to pay this tax on their family home. You certainly fail the fairness test. In fact, you seem to have a rather perverse definition of what constitutes fairness. But you are consistent, because you have consistently gone back to the same set of people. You have consistently put your hand in the pockets of low and middle income families, people who are struggling just to get by, and people living in these unfinished ghost estates. Polite language, really, for building sites. And I think it is ironic, and beyond ironic, it is perverse for a government minister, particularly one from the Labour Party, to stand in the Dáil and offer up rhetoric of fairness and fair play in that regard. So, Minister, how do you imagine the families are going to pay this tax? I mean, put yourself in the shoes of a family living in an incomplete housing development, and their gross annual income into the home is €30,000. Where are they getting the money to meet this tax? And how do you argue in any way that that represents fairness or equity for those people and their families?
Thank you. Minister.
Well, the purpose of this tax, Concordia, is to broaden the tax base and to bring property taxation in this country partially into line with the experience across Europe. We're virtually the only country in the OECD that doesn't have a property tax. Now, what Deputy MacDonald is concealing is her complete opposition to the property tax, which is remarkable, given that up the road there is a property tax in Uri 3 times as large as the property tax being introduced here. 3 times as large. And this kind of partitionist mentality, on behalf of Sinn Féin is very, very difficult to understand. How is it that it's all right in one part of the island, but not all right in another part of the island? The Department of the Environment consulted carefully with every local authority in Ireland, told them the purpose of what they were engaged in, and asked them to assess these estates against the criteria that I have mentioned. And the result is the result. The opposition of Sinn Féin to any measure that seeks to rectify the difficulties into which the country have been plunged. Deputy MacDonald in particular is very good at describing the problem, but she's not very good at coming up with solutions. And what we need in these circumstances are solutions. And I'd be careful now. I'd be careful now if I were Fianna Fáil, given the legacy of the problem we're discussing. It is remarkable that you're prepared to put your heads above the parapet, given your connections to this problem. And of course, all you have to do is to go out to the north side and have a look at the Pyrite houses, and you'll understand the Sinn Féin link to the issue. So we're dealing with a legacy issue, and we're seeking to deal with it in as fair and consistent a manner as we can. And I would hope that at least the party that authored the property tax would now support it.
Perhaps those in the side shows, if you'd stay quiet while somebody is speaking, it'd be a great help. Deputy Matty McGrath.
Minister, I too want to continue in the same vein today, because the people out in the country are bewildered and becoming more bewildered by the hour. This situation where 8 times less people, with all your blunder and bluss and all your reports and examinations, 8 times fewer people this year will be exempted from the property tax. And I can only speak for South Tipperary, Minister, my own constituency. But I know that the unfinished estates, none of them have been completed. We didn't get enough money from the government, from the Minister, to put up the hoarding around them, to make them safe. So this is a total farce. I mean, when people read this morning, lose your health cover or your second car to sort out if you're in a negative equity and you want to do a deal with the bank. When people see that lenders are going to get tough. When people see what you and the Taoiseach Minister and Minister of Finance chaired a meeting last week about the situation in Cyprus, and we saw how uncaring we are.
Sorry,
those people are standing up.
What are we discussing now?
Sorry?
Which topic are we?
I'm discussing the topic of the government's recklessness and uncaring, especially from Labour government, for the people. 1913 was the lockout, great lockout. 2013 is going to be the kick-out. And that's what you're doing, putting people out of their homes, Minister. You should be ashamed of yourselves. I have a headline in the paper again this morning. A couple were locked into their home in Dublin, quite near the Minister himself, by, I suppose, probably people who came along, the heavies again, boarding them up with galvanised when they were in their home with a small child. What next, Minister? Is there no new load that the Labour Party are going to go to hang on with the mud guard? You now become the mud flat, and the mud is thickened for the Fine Gael government, Minister. I think it's an appalling situation, and you can wax lyrically. You can.
Sorry.
The question I have is, Minister. The question I have is, when are you going to stand up for the people you promised that you would stand up for? And no point in blaming everybody, developers and Gelignite or other kind of stuff and everything else. The people out there in negative equity, the people who can't have to have a second car, Minister. I have to have a second car, anybody in my constituency.
Sorry,
because
put your question.
My question is, when are you going to look after the ordinary people and not put them into penury, allow them to have their car to bring their kids to school, or do you want them all uneducated, Minister? This is unbelievable.
Thanks, Deputy. Minister.
Well, I feel like the people of South Tipperary after that. I too am bewildered. I mean, I'm very hurt. I'm very hurt, Deputy McGrath, that you should make such charges against me and against the government. The fact of the matter is, what we are trying to do is to protect ordinary people. What we are trying to do is put this country back on the road to economic recovery. And, you know, there can't be any social services. There can't be nurses and teachers and fire brigade workers in post unless we get the economy right. And I don't think that it's fully understood how grave the situation was at the point that this government took over. The situation, we were on the edge of the abyss. That's how serious it was. And you referred to Cyprus. And what's playing out there at the moment. I mean, I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the television last night as the Fianna Fáil leader went out onto the plinth to talk about what the Eurogroup ought to have done in the case of Cyprus in respect of the proposal in respect of private bank accounts. He seems to have forgotten that he gave away the National Pension Reserve Fund when the Troika came in here. He gave away the National Pension Reserve Fund, people's future pensions, as a condition of the bailout. You know, there was no statutory measure accompanying that. So, you know, there's an awful lot of hypocrisy. There's an awful lot of hypocrisy associated with this, and you know, there is always an element of theatre about Parliament. And, you know, I understand the posturing. But at the end of the day, we have to get the economy right. And what we're seeking to do is to spread the tax burden, spread it as equitably as we can. There are some colleagues behind me representing, on all sides of the House, in fact, representing Dublin constituencies who would say that South Tipperary and other provincial constituencies get a better deal under the valuation system than happens in Dublin. But there had to be a valuation methodology settled on, and the one settled on is market value. And I believe that it is right that the efficacy of the collection system should not be in question, and that everybody makes a contribution who is able to make a contribution. There is a system of voluntary deferrals for those who can't do that, and there is a system of exemptions for those who accompanied the progress of the bill through the House. They know them in detail.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy McGrath.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you. Minister, I'm just merely trying to explain. We all accept we have to try and get out of this abyss that we're in. We were told that tonight that I voted for the bank guarantee. But how much worse would the abyss have been? That's why I mentioned Cyprus and the uncaring of your government now with the leadership of Europe for what's going on and being put on the people, robbing the private pensions, but of course their private savings. But of course you might mention Fianna Fáil robbing the pension fund, but you took out 0.6% of personal pensions of the ordinary people again, Minister. And when we see the bankers, the Richie Bouchers and many others, getting away all the time with what you promised you would do, and what you didn't do. And it seemed all the big people all the time are escaping. And the ordinary people, who your party was founded in Clonmel, my hometown, Minister, to represent those people, and you did ably for many years, many decades. You've abandoned them, you've left them behind you, and I don't see many of you canvassing up in County Meath because you're afraid to meet the people. But you'll have to meet the Minister, because ordinary people cannot take any more. They cannot afford the health pensions, not to mind to say happen to get rid of them. They can't afford to get sick. The bus services for buses have tripled the cost.
I have a supplementary question.
My question is, when is the Minister going to act on the mandate that he got from the people of this country, with the promises he made to look after the ordinary people, to burn the bondholders, to stop the obscene wages to former politicians and former bankers, and severing bankers, as we find out this week? When is he going to live up to his reputation of being a hard man? I remember on the programme with former Minister Pat Carey, a gentleman, and you had all the answers that night, Minister. You have none since, and abject failure.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister.
Well, the fundamental answer I had that night, Deputy McGrath, was that what Deputy Pat Carey and his colleagues had done would put the subsequent government into a straitjacket in terms of its economic freedom to make decisions for this country, and so it has turned out. So it has turned out to be. And the fact of the matter is that from the bank guarantee in 2008 to 2011 election, 250,000 of our people were made unemployed. 250,000 of our people lost their jobs. Now, that is the first priority of this government, is to put those 250,000 people back to work. That's the first priority. And in order to do that, you have to get the economy back into balance. You have to get the economy back into balance. That is the first challenge, and that is what we're working at. And there is no comparison between giving away the proceeds of the National Pension Reserve Fund and levying 0.6% as a contribution to the Jobs Initiative budget brought in by the Minister for Finance in the summer of 2011, that produced results in the tourism sector, in the hospitality sector and elsewhere, in circumstances where the same pension funds had been the recipients of enormously generous tax breaks and tax reliefs before that. So there is simply no comparison. And what we are trying to do is exactly what you claim to aspire to, Deputy, which is to look after the interests of the average citizen of this country, to give their sons and daughters an opportunity of working in their homeland again.
Thank you. That completes leaders' questions.